Sister, I know what you're thinking. Why am I alone? Why don't I have close friends like everyone else? But let me tell you something. What feels like rejection is actually God's redirection. You are not alone, you are set apart. One, God removes to improve sometimes. God will strip people away from your life because they are distractions from your destiny. Maybe you were leaning on them instead of leaning on Him. Maybe they were pulling you down when God is trying to lift you up. When people walk away, it's not a loss, it's a lesson. Look at Jesus. The closer He got to His purpose, the fewer people were around Him. When He was healing, thousands followed, but when He went to the cross, He stood alone. But in that moment of loneliness, He accomplished the greatest victory. God doesn't waste your loneliness. He is using this season to shape you, to prepare you, to make you stronger. Think of the greatest women in the Bible: Esther, Ruth, Mary. They all had seasons where they had no one to lean on but God. And guess what? That's when their breakthrough came. Esther had to stand alone before she could stand as a queen. Ruth had to leave everything behind before she walked into her blessing. Mary had to carry the weight of her calling even when no one understood it. Sister, maybe God isn't isolating you, He's positioning you. You are in training for something greater. 3, God wants your full attention when you have no one to talk to, no one to call, no one to run to. God says, now I have your full attention. That's when He starts speaking. That's when He starts revealing your purpose. Moses had to leave the crowd and climb the mountain to hear from God. Maybe you're in a mountain season right now. Maybe God is calling you higher. So instead of asking, why don't I have friends? Start asking God, what are you trying to teach me? For the right people will come in God's timing. If God has removed certain friendships, trust that He will bring the right people in the right season. People who don't just tolerate you, but celebrate you. People who won't compete with you, but complete you. Kingdom friendships, not convenience friendships. For now, embrace this season. Use it to grow, use it to heal, use it to strengthen your faith. Because when God brings the right people, you'll be ready. Final word, you are never alone. You may not have friends right now, but you have Jesus, the best friend you could ever ask for. He will never leave you, never betray you, never give up on you. And if He's all you have, then you already have more than enough. So stand tall, sister. This is not a punishment, it's preparation. Your loneliness is not a curse, it's a calling. Walk boldly in it. Stay strong, stay faithful, and watch how God turns your solitude into strength. There are times in life when God starts removing people, opportunities, and familiar comforts, and it feels like everything is falling apart. But what if it's not falling apart? What if it's falling into place? What if God is not punishing you, but preparing you? Sometimes the very things we hold on to are the things holding us back. We see loss, but God sees growth. We see rejection, but God sees redirection. God doesn't remove without a reason. He doesn't take away unless it's necessary for where He's leading you. The friendships that suddenly fade, the relationships that unexpectedly break, the people you once counted on who are no longer there. It's not an accident, it's divine intervention. The truth is, not everyone is meant to go where God is taking you. Not everyone is designed to walk with you in your next season. Some people were only assigned to a chapter, but you're trying to keep them for the whole book. Think about the story of Abraham and Lot. Lot was with Abraham, but he wasn't meant to stay with him forever. God had a promise for Abraham, but as long as Lot was with him, there was conflict, there was distraction, and there was delay. It was only when they separated that Abraham could fully walk in what God had for him. Some of us are delaying our own breakthrough because we're holding on to people who were never meant to stay. It's painful when people walk away. It's confusing when the ones you thought would always be there suddenly disappear. But if you trust God, you will understand that every removal is for your improvement. God sees what you can't. He hears conversations you didn't. He knows the intentions behind the smiles. He knows who is truly for you and who is just there for what you can offer. Sometimes He will allow people to leave, not because they are bad, but because they are not good for your purpose. God is more committed to your growth than your comfort. He will shake up your surroundings to push you into the next level. He will shake up your surroundings to push you into the next level. When you start feeling alone, when you start seeing people drift away, don't panic. Pray. Ask God, what are you making room for? What are you protecting me from? What are you preparing me for? Because every time something is removed, it's making space for something greater. If you never lost certain friends, you would never develop deeper trust in God. If that relationship never ended, you would have never discovered your true worth. If that door never closed, you would have never walked into the right one. What seems like loss is actually gain in disguise. We must stop mourning what God has already moved on from. Some of us are grieving over friendships that God had to end. We are crying over people who were only meant to be temporary. God knows who belongs in your future, and He knows who will only hold you back. The longer you hold on to what He's trying to remove, the more you delay your blessing. Let go and trust that God is making room for better. The right people, the right opportunities, the right relationships, they will come in His perfect timing. You don't have to chase them. You don't have to beg them to stay. When God sends the right people, they will align with your purpose, not distract you from it. So if God is removing, it's because He's improving. If He's taking away, it's because He's making space. If you feel lonely, remember that separation is often the setup for elevation. Let go, trust Him, and watch what He does next. Isolation is never easy. It can feel like a punishment, like you've been forgotten, like you're walking through life alone while everyone else is surrounded by support. But what if this season of isolation is not rejection, but preparation? What if God is pulling you away not to break you, but to build you? What if your loneliness is actually an invitation for transformation? God does His greatest work in seasons of separation. When you look at the stories of people God elevated, you will see that before their breakthrough, they had to go through isolation. Before David became king, he was alone in the fields tending sheep. Before Moses led Israel out of Egypt, he spent years in the wilderness, away from everything he knew. Before Joseph ruled in Egypt, he was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, and locked in a prison. The pattern is clear. Before promotion comes separation. Before God elevates, He isolates. Isolation is the place where God removes distractions. When you are surrounded by people, by noise, by constant opinions, it's easy to lose sight of His voice. It's easy to depend on others instead of depending on Him. But when you're alone, when the crowd is gone, when the people you thought would always be there suddenly disappear, that's when you learn to lean on God like never before. That's when your faith is tested and strengthened. That's when you discover who you truly are and who God has called you to be. We often ask God to take us higher, to bless us, to expand our territory. But what we don't always realize is that elevation requires separation. If you want to go higher, you can't carry the weight of unnecessary attachments. Not everyone is meant to go with you. Not every relationship is designed to last. Some people were assigned to your past, not your future. And when God sees that you are trying to hold on to something that will only hinder you, He allows isolation to happen so you can refocus, reset, and realign with His purpose. The discomfort of isolation is real, but so is the growth that comes from it. When you are alone, you have a choice. You can either feel sorry for yourself, or you can use this season to prepare for where God is taking you. You can sit in self-pity, or you can sharpen your skills. You can complain, or you can consecrate yourself. God is not wasting this season, and neither should you. The isolation is a training ground, a refining process, a time when God is developing the strength, wisdom, and character you will need for the next level. Look at Jesus. Before He began His ministry, He was led into the wilderness alone. No disciples, no crowds, no distractions, just Him and the Father. It was in that place of solitude that He overcame temptation, strengthened His spirit, and prepared for the mission ahead. If the Son of God had to go through isolation before stepping into his purpose, what makes you think you won't have to? So instead of resenting your isolation, start embracing it. Instead of asking, "Why am I alone?" start asking, "God, what are you preparing me for?" Because on the other side of this season is your elevation. What feels like a setback is actually a setup. What feels like loneliness is actually alignment. What looks like separation is actually preparation. Stay faithful, stay focused, and watch what God does next. There comes a time in life when God starts removing distractions, closing doors, and pulling you away from the noise. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like isolation. It feels like everything and everyone you relied on is slipping away. But what if this isn't rejection? What if this isn't abandonment? What if God is simply trying to get your full attention? When life is full of distractions, it's easy to overlook the voice of God. It's easy to depend on people more than we depend on Him. We turn to friends for advice before we seek His wisdom. We run to social media for validation before we rest in His presence. We stay so busy with relationships, work, and entertainment that we don't even realize how far we've drifted from Him. So, in His love and mercy, He starts removing distractions. He starts pulling us into a season of solitude, not to punish us, but to realign us. Look at the moments in the Bible when God called someone into something greater. He always had to separate them first. Moses had to leave Egypt and spend time in the wilderness before he was ready to lead. Elijah had to be alone by the brook before he heard God's next instruction. Even Paul, after encountering Jesus, spent years away before stepping into his full calling. And Jesus himself? He often withdrew to lonely places to pray, to be alone with the Father, to receive strength for the mission ahead. God is not in competition for your attention. He will not force you to listen. But if He sees that your heart is divided, that your mind is occupied with things that are not aligned with His will, He will allow situations that make you realize He is the only one you truly need. He will remove people who have become idols in your life. He will close doors that you were never meant to walk through. He will quiet the noise around you so that you can finally hear His voice clearly. When you feel like you have no one left to turn to, that's when God is saying, "Turn to me." When you feel like you have no answers, that's when He's saying, "Seek me and I will give you wisdom." When everything seems uncertain, that's when He's reminding you, "I am your solid foundation." The moments when you feel the most alone are often the moments when He is the closest. But you have to be willing to embrace this season instead of resisting it. So many times we ask God to speak, but we don't give Him room to do so. We want direction, but we don't take time to listen. We want clarity, but we stay too busy to hear. God is always speaking, but the question is, are we making space to listen? Sometimes He has to slow us down just so we can recognize His voice. Sometimes He has to strip away our comforts so we can finally seek Him with our whole heart. This season of solitude is not a mistake. It is not a punishment. It is an invitation to go deeper, to grow stronger, to trust Him fully. When you have nothing else to hold on to, you will realize that God is all you ever needed. And when you give Him your full attention, He will reveal things you never saw before. He will heal places in your heart that you didn't even know were broken. He will prepare you for something greater than you imagined. Stay still, stay present, and let Him do the work He is trying to do in you. There is no greater example of loneliness with a purpose than Jesus. He walked this earth surrounded by crowds, yet He often stood alone. He was praised by many, yet deeply misunderstood. He performed miracles, healed the sick, and raised the dead, but the same people who cheered for Him one day turned against Him the next. If Jesus, the Son of God, had to walk alone, why do we think we won't have to? From the very beginning of His ministry, Jesus experienced separation. He was led by the Spirit into the wilderness alone to be tested. No disciples, no supporters, no comfort, just Him and God. It was in that isolation that He overcame temptation, showing that before every great assignment comes a season of separation. He had to walk alone before he walked in power. He had to be tested before he was trusted. Even when he chose his 12 disciples, he knew that one would betray him, one would deny him, and the rest would abandon him in his darkest hour. Yet he kept moving forward because he wasn't depending on their loyalty, he was depending on the Father's plan. The same Peter who swore he would never leave Jesus denied him 3 times when pressure came. The same Judas who walked closely with him for years sold him for silver. When he prayed in Gethsemane, asking his closest friends to stay awake with him, they fell asleep. When soldiers came to take him, they all fled. But Jesus didn't let loneliness stop him. He didn't let rejection break him. He didn't let abandonment make him bitter. He understood something powerful. His mission was greater than his emotions. He knew that not everyone who walked with him was meant to stay. He knew that the path to purpose is often a lonely one. He knew that walking alone was part of fulfilling his destiny. When he carried the cross, he carried it alone. No disciples were there to help him. No crowds were cheering for him anymore. The same voices that once shouted, "Hosanna," were now yelling, "Crucify him." The people who once followed him for miracles had turned their backs. Yet he kept walking, step by step, carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, because he knew that sometimes the loneliest moments lead to the greatest victories. And then, in his final moments, as he hung on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If anyone understands the pain of feeling abandoned, it's Jesus. If anyone understands the heartbreak of standing alone, it's him. But even in that moment of deepest sorrow, he didn't give up. He surrendered to the will of the Father, knowing that his suffering had a purpose. What looked like defeat was actually victory. What seemed like loneliness was actually the fulfillment of prophecy. What appeared to be the end was actually the greatest beginning. 3 days later, he rose again, proving that the pain of isolation is temporary, but the power of God's plan is eternal. If Jesus had to walk alone, you will too. If he had to be betrayed, rejected, and abandoned, you will face it too. But just like him, you will rise. Just like him, your loneliness will not be wasted. Just like him, what feels like the end is only the beginning of something greater. Stay faithful, stay focused, and keep walking, even if you have to walk alone. There are moments in life when it feels like everything is working against you. You lose friends, doors close, plans fall apart. The things you thought would last forever suddenly disappear. You pray for relief, but the struggle continues. You ask for answers, but all you hear is silence. It's easy to believe that you're being punished, that somehow you did something wrong, that maybe God has forgotten about you. But what if this isn't punishment? What if this is preparation? God does not waste pain. He does not allow hardship without a purpose. When he removes something, he is making space. When he delays something, he is developing something in you. The struggles you are facing are not meant to break you, they are meant to build you. They are refining you, strengthening you, shaping you into the person you need to be for where he is taking you next. But if you only see this season as punishment, you will miss the preparation. If you only see the loss, you will miss the lesson. Think about the moments in your life when things didn't go as planned. The times when you thought you were ready, but the opportunity never came. The relationships that ended when you thought they would last. The dreams that seemed so close but never became reality. In the moment, it felt unfair. But looking back, can you see how God was protecting you? Can you see how he was leading you to something better? What you thought was rejection was actually redirection. What you thought was loss was actually a lesson. What you thought was God ignoring you was actually God preparing you. Every great calling requires great preparation. Before David became king, he was a shepherd. Before Joseph ruled in Egypt, he was a slave and a prisoner. Before Moses led the Israelites, he spent 40 years in the wilderness. Before Jesus began his ministry, he was tested in isolation. Every single one of them could have thought, why is this happening to me? Why is God allowing this? But what looked like delay was actually development. What felt like punishment was actually preparation. God is not punishing you, he is positioning you. He is strengthening your faith, sharpening your character, and teaching you to depend on Him alone. If He gave you everything you wanted right now, you wouldn't be ready to handle it. If He allowed you to step into your destiny without preparation, you would not have the wisdom or endurance to sustain it. The waiting is not wasted. The hardship is not pointless. The struggle is shaping you. The problem is, most people quit in the middle of their preparation. They give up when it gets too hard. They walk away when they don't understand what God is doing. They let frustration steal their faith. But those who endure, those who trust God even when they don't see the full picture, those who believe that this season has a purpose, those are the ones who step into something greater than they ever imagined. So instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" start asking, "What is God preparing me for?" Instead of seeing this season as punishment, see it as training. Instead of feeling abandoned, recognize that you are being equipped. Every storm you face, every delay you endure, every battle you fight is leading you somewhere greater. And one day, when you step into what God has been preparing you for, you will look back and realize it was all necessary. Every tear, every trial, every test, it was all part of the process. Stay faithful, stay patient, and trust that God is preparing you for something you can't even imagine. There are moments in life when loneliness feels overwhelming. You look around and realize the people you once counted on are no longer there. Friendships that seemed unbreakable fade away. Relationships you thought would last forever come to an end. It feels unfair. It feels confusing. You start to wonder if you'll always be alone, if something is wrong with you, if you'll ever find people who truly understand and support you. But what if this season of loneliness is not a mistake? What if it's God making room for the right people to come at the right time? God is intentional. He does not allow anything to be removed from your life without a purpose. Sometimes He takes people away because they were never meant to stay. Sometimes He closes doors because they would have led you in the wrong direction. And sometimes He isolates you so that when the right people come, you can recognize them. The problem is, we often try to force relationships that God is trying to remove. We hold on to people who were only meant to be temporary. We chase friendships that no longer align with where God is leading us. But the truth is, when God removes someone, it's because He has something better in store. It's not easy to let go. It's not easy to watch people walk away. But if you trust God, you will understand that His timing is perfect. He knows who belongs in your life and who doesn't. He knows who will help you grow and who will hold you back. He sees what you can't see. He hears conversations you were never meant to hear. He knows the true intentions of people's hearts. And when He removes someone, it's not to hurt you, it's to protect you. We often pray for God to send the right people, but we don't always trust Him when He starts removing the wrong ones. We want good friends, but we don't want to let go of unhealthy relationships. We ask for His best, but we try to hold on to what is familiar. But you cannot receive what God has for you if your hands are full of what He's trying to take away. You have to be willing to let go. You have to be willing to trust that His plan is better than yours. The right people will come in God's timing, not yours. You may feel like you've been alone for too long. You may feel like everyone else has meaningful relationships while you are still waiting. But just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it won't happen. God is working behind the scenes. He is aligning the right connections, preparing the right friendships, setting up the right relationships. And when the time is right, they will come. You won't have to force it. You won't have to beg for attention. You won't have to convince someone to see your worth. The right people will recognize it. The right people will add to your life, not drain you. They will support your purpose, not distract you from it. Until then, trust the process. Use this season to grow. Become the person you are looking for in others. Strengthen your relationship with God so that when the right people come, they complement your life rather than complete it. Because the truth is, no friendship, no relationship, no human connection can fill the void that only God can fill. When you seek Him first, everything else will fall into place. The right people will come at the right time, in the right way, And when they do, you will realize that every lonely season, every painful goodbye, every moment of waiting was worth it. Loneliness is one of the hardest things to endure. It creeps in when you least expect it, making you feel forgotten, unwanted. You watch others surrounded by friends, laughter, and love, while you sit in silence, wondering why your life feels so empty. It's easy to believe that loneliness is a punishment, that it's a sign something is wrong with you. But what if loneliness isn't a curse? What if it's a tool God is using to build you? What if this season of isolation is actually the very thing that will make you stronger? God doesn't waste anything, not even loneliness. He allows it because He knows that sometimes the only way to grow is to be separated. When people are always around, when the noise never stops, it's easy to depend on them more than you depend on Him. It's easy to let the opinions of others shape your identity. But when you are alone, you have no choice but to face yourself. To face your thoughts, to face your fears, and most importantly, to face God. It is in that quiet space that He begins to work. Look at the greatest people in the Bible. Almost all of them had to go through seasons of isolation before stepping into their purpose. Moses was alone in the wilderness before leading Israel. Joseph was abandoned and imprisoned before he ruled Egypt. David was in the fields with sheep before he ever became a king. Even Jesus, before He started His ministry, spent time alone in the desert, fasting and praying. They all had moments where they felt alone, forgotten and set aside. But in that loneliness they became stronger. They developed patience, endurance, wisdom, and unshakable faith. Loneliness teaches you things that comfort never could. It forces you to rely on God in ways you never had to before. It makes you dig deeper, pray harder, and trust more. It shows you who you really are when no one is watching. It reveals your weaknesses so they can be strengthened. It removes distractions so you can focus on what truly matters. Most people try to escape loneliness. They fill their time with meaningless conversations, toxic relationships, and distractions that numb the pain but never heal the root issue. But what if, instead of running from loneliness, you embraced it? What if you saw it as a season of training rather than a season of suffering? What if you use this time to grow stronger, wiser, and more disciplined? What if you let God use this season to shape you into the person He created you to be? Strength doesn't come from constant comfort, it comes from struggle. Diamonds are formed under pressure, gold is refined through fire, muscles are built through resistance, and faith is strengthened in loneliness. The very thing you are trying to escape might be the thing God is using to prepare you for something greater. You won't always feel this way. Loneliness is a season, not a sentence. God will bring the right people at the right time, but until then, let this season build you. Use this time to pray, to learn, to develop new skills, to heal, to grow. Because when the season changes, when the doors open, when the right people come into your life, you will look back and realize that loneliness was not your enemy. It was your teacher. It was in the solitude that you found your strength. It was in the quiet that you found your voice. And it was in the isolation that you found God in a way you never had before. Stay strong. This season is making you unshakable. Loneliness can feel like a heavy burden. It creeps into your heart, making you believe you are forgotten, unseen, and unloved. You look around and see others surrounded by friendships, relationships, and support, yet you feel like you are walking through life alone. The silence can be deafening. The emptiness can feel unbearable. But the truth is, no matter how alone you feel, you are never truly alone. God has never left you. From the moment you took your first breath, He has been with you, guiding you, protecting you, and loving you even when you didn't feel it. The enemy wants you to believe that no one cares, that no one sees your struggle, that no one understands your pain. But God does. He sees every tear you've cried. He knows every thought that has weighed heavy on your heart. He hears the prayers you whisper in the middle of the night when no one else is around. Loneliness is not a sign that you have been abandoned. It is an opportunity to draw closer to the one who will never leave you. The world may let you down, people may walk away, friends may change, but God remains constant. His love does not waver based on circumstances. His presence does not disappear when times get tough. He is with you in every season, through every struggle, in every moment of pain. Think about the times when you felt the most broken, the most lost, the most forgotten. Somehow you made it through. Somehow you found the strength to keep going. That was not by accident. That was God sustaining you. That was His presence carrying you when you didn't have the strength to stand. Even when you didn't recognize it, He was there. Throughout the Bible, God reminds His people again and again that they are never alone. He told Joshua, "I will never leave you nor forsake you." He reminded David, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Jesus told His disciples, "I am with you always, even to the end of the age." This promise is not just for them, it is for you. The enemy will try to make you focus on what is missing, on who is absent, on what has been lost. But God wants you to shift your focus to what remains. His presence is unshakable. His love is unfailing. His power is limitless. When you start to see loneliness as an invitation instead of a curse, everything changes. This is your chance to know Him in a deeper way, to hear His voice more clearly, to experience His love more fully. People may fail you, but God never will. Relationships may change, but His love stays the same. Seasons may shift, but His presence is constant. You are not alone in your pain. You are not alone in your struggles. You are not alone in your journey. God is walking with you through it all. And when you feel like you can't take another step, He is the one carrying you forward. So do not be discouraged. Do not believe the lie that you have been forgotten. Lift your head, open your heart, and recognize that the presence of God surrounds you. He is near to the brokenhearted. He is close to those who feel alone. He is with you now, in this very moment. You are not abandoned. You are not forsaken. You are deeply loved, fully known, and never truly alone.